highly intelligent, dangerously powerful, the unchallenged sovereign of Earth's oceans. They are the orca, killer whales, and their complex societies extend back into antiquity. But does our modern society now threaten theirs? Join Jean-Michel Cousteau and his team as they investigate humankind's mirror in the water and discover that the orca's fight for survival is in fact now our own. It's Jean-Michel Cousteau, Ocean Adventures.
She was a wonderful whale. When I was first out here, I had no VHF radio, I had no radar, I didn't even have a compass, and once became lost in the fog. I felt like I was in a glass of milk. You just can't see anything. And I could hear on the hydrophone this big cruise ship headed for me. Anyway, Eve and her family, the next 20 minutes, came up so close to my boat that I was constantly switching the engine into neutral because I didn't want to hit them. And after a few minutes, I could just barely see something, and oh, it was an island, and I popped out, and I was into the glorious sunset and in the clear, and I kept waiting for Eve's family to come out of the fog, but they never did. And that was, for me, it was like worlds colliding, trying to figure out what had gone on, that she had turned around, that she'd stayed by my boat, and then when I was safe, she turned around again. And at that moment, I believed all the stories about dolphins pushing sailors to shore. I don't know what it is about these whales, but they do things like that, and everyone studying these whales sees the same thing.
They are our counterparts in the sea, the most complex marine species on the planet. Orca, the ruler of the ocean. Male orcas can be 9 tons, 32 feet long, with a towering dorsal fin 6 feet tall. But crowned with a smaller curved fin, it may be the females that rule the pod. They are the most widely distributed marine mammal in the world. Their realm extends from the Arctic to the Antarctic. Largest of the dolphins, orcas, also called killer whales, number fewer than 100,000 worldwide. And finding them will take Jean-Michel Cousteau and his team across the globe, accompanied at times by his son Fabien and daughter Celine. The Cousteau team will journey to both the northern and southern hemispheres as they seek out killer whales in the Pacific Ocean. The team will discover that people and orcas share surprising similarities, even similar needs, a fact made clear by their experiences with Keiko, the world's most famous killer whale. The team will also learn how some of the characteristics we consider strictly human, like language and culture, may have also evolved among killer whales. They'll travel among groups of orcas that are as similar and as different as we are from each other. Their journey begins in the Pacific Northwest, where orcas have been revered by native people for millennia, studied by scientists for decades, and where our story of the complicated relationship between orcas and people begins.
What we're trying to do is to make the connection between humans and nature, comparing humans and orcas. They are the dominant species in the ocean. We are the dominant species on land. And we all depend on the same thing.
The killer whale, the orca, is such a powerful animal in terms of its appeal to people. It captivates the imagination because we know that they're large dolphins and they're very intelligent. They live in very social groups, much like our own.
John Ford is a pioneer in orca acoustics, the first scientist to identify dialects in their calls and to change our beliefs.
Even though I've only been involved studying orcas for around 30 years, things have changed so drastically in our attitude towards this incredible animal. The attitude at that time was that these were dangerous animals, a threat to people, a threat to the livelihood of fishermen. And I was caught up in that. When I was young, growing up on Vancouver Island here, we'd go out fishing and a group of orcas would go by and we would be terrified if they swam under the boat, because that was the feeling that these were dangerous animals. On our coast in the mid-1960s to mid-1970s, there was a live capture fishery for orcas, and they were sent to aquariums all over the world. I actually got a job at the Vancouver Aquarium and soon became a whale trainer in the early 70s, and got to know them in that context, and they were fascinating animals, of course. Even then it was quite controversial holding them in captivity, but I realized we had so much to learn from them.
Orcas have very large, complex brains, and when I first caught sight of an orca brain, which was in a jar on a shelf in a lab, I was really quite amazed. So the first question that came to me was, what does this whale do with that brain? Still the question I'm asking.
That was 40 years ago, and you worked with some animals in captivity?
1967. Behavioral research with an orca named Skana at the Vancouver Aquarium, and they wanted somebody to study the whale.
What did you learn from her?
Mostly, I think I learned that this was a very unsuitable place to keep a remarkable being.
That was around the time, actually, that Dr. Michael Bigg, who died in 1990 and was very much our mentor and the true pioneer whose vision led to photo identification, he started learning about the societies that these whales live in around our coast, and that these were incredibly complex animals with very elaborate social relationships.
You put the brain and the implications of that together with the social side, and you understand immediately that putting her in a concrete tank and completely shutting off the company of her kind was an enormously unfair and inappropriate thing to be doing.
But at the time, it was through the close contact of captivity that we begin to learn about them, one at a time. The story of one whale in particular, named Keiko, stirred our passion and raised enduring questions about captivity. Keiko was captured in 1979 in Iceland and became one of the 136 orcas taken into captivity since 1961. But he did not become one of the more than 100 that have died there, or one of the 42 killer whales that remain in captivity. Captured at age 2 and eventually sent to Mexico City, Keiko was breathing the world's smoggiest air, a master of the ocean at 7,000 feet above sea level, in the artificial seawater of a shallow pool where he entertained the crowds. Keiko would have lived his life in poor health, swimming in circles, except for one thing. He became a movie star. As Willie, he was free to 10 million film-going children. But in reality, Keiko went nowhere. The stress of his environment caused a skin disease, which spread as his health seriously deteriorated. The real whale was slowly dying, and Keiko had to be moved. When it was learned that Keiko was still captive, millions of children wrote in, demanding his freedom, and a spontaneous movement was started to free the sick whale. Keiko's owners donated him for the unprecedented experiment of reintroducing him into the wild, and the Oregon Coast Aquarium customized a pool for his care. Suddenly, the reality of freeing Keiko became far more interesting than the movie, as Keiko began a long and complicated journey toward freedom. Ultimately, true freedom for Keiko would mean being accepted into a pod of wild whales, since orcas live their entire lives in tightly connected social groups where all members are related to each other. It's now understood the best chance for Keiko would be to find his mother.
It very much is a matriarchal society, or matrilineal, in that everybody in the group is related through female descent to a female ancestor. Individuals stay with their mother or their grandmother for the whole life. And it took some years to really understand that, because it is very unusual in that the large adult males never leave the group. The bond between a mature male and his mother is very, very strong.
I know that Eve, the whale that came to you in the fog, was a matriarch. What happened when she passed away?
Eve only had 2 sons, no daughters. And those 2 males went around Hansen Island for weeks and didn't survive her death for very long. Generally, the males will join their sister's family, but they become a loose satellite. They never again have the bond that they had with their mother. It's a unique social system. Orca is a very conservative animal. Basically, you only socialize with somebody who your mother introduced you to.
The resident populations on this coast are really fairly clearly divided socially into 2 different groups. The northern residents, it's about 240 whales, 16 pods. The southern residents are around 90 whales, 3 pods, quite a bit smaller. What's really interesting, and we don't really understand this, but they never mix. And then we have overlaying that, we have transients, the mammal hunters. They don't mix with the residents, but they will often mix with other transients. And then occasionally we have these offshore whales, and they don't mix with these others either. So we have these whales that in many ways are just focused on their very familiar neighboring groups that are of the same lifestyle.
It's a pattern strangely familiar, much like human tribes, existing near each other but separate, with languages and behaviors learned and passed on over generations. We define it as culture, and for both humans and orcas, different cultures exist among the same species.
That was beautiful. Did you get that, Carrie?
Yeah, I think so.
That was amazing. Huh? See, I told you those 2 boys, huh?
And they both did that.
They both did.
Oh, the New Zealand orca I found are just so completely different from the Pacific Northwest. I had this paradigm that was how orca were around the world. They had a matrilineal society and stayed in very strongly bonded groups, and that there was another population who fed on marine mammals. Well, it turns out here that the New Zealand orca are moving around between groups. They feed on fish, sharks, rays, and marine mammals. Acoustically, they're different. They have a good Kiwi twang, just like I do. And it looks like they're moving big distances compared to the animals up there. I've got them travelling an average of 100 to 150 kilometres a day. And I think that's one of the things that fascinates me about orca is the different cultures. Even though they're in similar habitats, they're just so completely different.
Orcas have been stable in the social groups that we're looking at now for literally thousands of years. If you look at the society and understand that this has evolved over a very long period of time, you realize that you're looking at a successful society.
The wild pod. The challenge for him would be enormous, since strong social bonds may actually define what it means to be an orca. At the time, no one knew how to free a captive orca. It was a new frontier to trainers like Steve Clausen and to Jean-Michel, who became involved in the effort and who saw Keiko as a symbol of more than just one whale. Curator Nolan Harvey knew how far Keiko was from a wild orca.
We're trying to teach Keiko to not only work for us within this pool so we can take better care of him, but we need to let him become a killer whale again. We need to untrain him. Our goal all along has been to give him control of his life. We're an active part of it.